Okay, I'm just going to get started on another dicehub demonstration. So I've just loaded the dicehub website, and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call this blackhawk. I'm going to set that to internal visibility and create project. Okay, next step is to create a mesher. So this is just creating a meshing application. So I've got the options on the left here. I'm just going to work my way through them. And yeah, and we've got background mesh there, so that's good. So I've got geometry already, so I'm going to upload that. It's helicopter geometry. I've literally just got this geometry and run it through netfab just to clean up any holes in it. Ooh. So it's quite a large geometry. It's about 24 meters long. There it is. So first thing is to sort out the background mesh. So with this sort of case, I haven't done this one before, so it's going to be a bit of guesswork. So let's do -40 to 40. -20 20 and Z -20 20. That's probably going to be a bit too big to start off with. So the cell size, the number of cells. So it's going to be 80, 40, 40. That's quite a lot of background mesh, really. Let's just zoom out and see what that looks like. Okay, the graphics is a little bit slow, which is why it's taking quite a long time. Now with that background mesh, that looks a bit too fine to me. I mean, the domain size is possibly about right, but I probably want to have half that number. So 80, 40, 20, 20. That looks a bit more like it. So if we're happy with that, material point, well, that's probably okay. -20. Why? Just so we know exactly where it is. I want to put a material point outside of the geometry. That's okay. Edge refinement. This is going to be a bit of guesswork, really. If we have some edge refinement, we've got background mesh, let's say. 4 levels. Is 4 levels enough? Difficult to tell really, isn't it? Surface refinement. For a first stab at this geometry, let's do 4 and 5, and then the edge refinement can be 5 as well. Volume refinement, for this case, I'm not sure if I actually want any volume refinement, so I'm going to leave that one as it is. And I just want to click a quick flow solution, so I'm going to leave off the boundary layers for the time being. Cell zones, add refinement region. Well, again, for the cell zone, I've got a fine enough background mesh, so I'm going to leave that as it is. So I'm just going to run that now and see what happens, see what sort of mesh it creates. Okay, so that's finished meshing now. That took probably about 5 minutes, and so when it's meshing, you get all the usual snappy hex mesh output, and then after that, when it's finished, it does a mesh check. So it says there's, as usual, there's a few skew cells there. Go back to the meshing one, we can see that we have got 285,000 cells. So that's a relatively small mesh for this kind of application. One thing I forgot to mention, which is quite useful, is that if you go up to menu and you can go to advanced options, and then there's some other settings here which you've got access to. And one of the very useful ones is cells between levels. So especially for external flow around, aircraft or cars, then quite often you want to increase this quite a bit so that you get a much more gradual decrease in the refinement away from the body. So you might want to increase that to 3, 4, 5 or 6, and then that'll give you a much more mesh close to the body. So that's just something to bear in mind, and you've got some other options there that you've got access to. So that's all. And you get to that through menu and advanced options if you need to use that one. So going back to this case now, I want to have a look at the result. See what the mesh is like. So first thing to check is that we've got some internal mesh here, which we have, so that's good. And the second thing we want to look at is patch 0. We can switch off the internal mesh. And seem to fit. And if I just try and manipulate that, and so that is great. That is the surface mesh. I'll try and just move it up a little bit. That's pretty good. That's not too bad at all. That is the surface mesh of our Blackhawk aircraft. So I can just pull that down a bit. So for a first attempt, that's pretty good. That looks okay. And there's a little bit of surface mesh there. So, and you can see on some of the finer features that the mesh is not fine enough to have captured all of it. And there might be some areas where there's thin surfaces where the mesh has just gone straight through the surface, but that is to be expected. If you're working with a geometry that's fairly new. and you haven't spent too much time cleaning it up. So the next thing I want to do is just to have a look at through the internal mesh. And so I want to create a slice filter. So I'm just going to go down here, do Z plane, slice filter, apply, and fit that to view, and do that in parallel mode. And I want to take off I want to go back to the results scene so I can see that a bit clearer. I'm going to adjust the camera and go to one particular side view. If I go back to this slice filter, I can do surface with edges, and I can change the colour of that to, well, whatever I want. So grey is quite a good one, and apply that. And then as soon as I go back to the scene, then I can see the mesh that I've got. So if I just try and zoom in a bit. Now, particularly with this case, you can see that we do actually want to have more mesh around the aircraft. So that parameter that I was just talking about, the number of cells between levels, that wants to be quite a bit higher, like 4 or 6 or something like that. But I mean, the main thing is that we haven't got any leaks in the geometry, and we've meshed the aircraft. So having done that, we can simply exit from this and then go back into the flow solver. So just go to menu, back to project. And now we can see that we've got a mesh, and so the next stage is to go onto the flow solver. I'll do that separately.